The night, he never returned. Part I. Baltimore had never felt as heavy as it did that night. Rain poured against the cracked windows of the tiny apartment as Naomi Carter stood in the center of the living room, her dark-skinned hands trembling. Her oldest son, Malik, only 12, watched her silently from the doorway. Her middle child, Aisha, 8, held the youngest, Jamir, who was barely 5 and already old enough to understand fear. Their father should have been home hours ago. Naomi had called him again and again, her voice shaking each time the call went straight to voicemail. But deep inside her chest, a part of her already knew. She felt it in the stale stillness of the room, in the cold drip of water from the leaking roof, in the way the rain outside seemed to echo a warning. He wasn't coming back. Naomi had always carried more weight than most. Life in the west side of Baltimore rarely gave second chances, and for a dark-skinned black woman raising 3 children, even the first chances were scarce. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the message that arrived the next morning. A knock at the door, 2 men she had never seen before. Cold eyes, sharp voices. They told her her husband owed them money he had promised to deliver the night he vanished. Money they now expected her to pay. Naomi felt her throat close. "I don't know anything about this," she whispered, but they didn't care. To them, she wasn't a person who's to target. When they left, she sank to the floor. Malik knelt beside her, his young voice trembling. "Mom, what's going to happen to us?" Naomi didn't answer. She didn't know. Over the next week, the world seemed to collapse in slow motion. Bills piled up. Her landlord taped a final eviction notice to the door. Her food stamps ran out early. Naomi went 2 full days without eating, saving every scrap for her children. She tried to hide her hunger, her exhaustion, her fear, but Malik noticed. Aisha noticed. Even tiny Jamir noticed. One night, as the children slept side by side on the same mattress, Naomi sat in the dark, staring at their worried faces. All 3 had the same deep brown skin as hers, the same bright eyes that once sparkled with childhood, but now even their innocence seemed threatened by the shadows pressing in. She whispered to herself, tears running down her cheeks, "I can't break. Not now." Outside, a siren wailed through the streets. Inside, Naomi took the first breath. It didn't feel like drowning. Tomorrow, she would either find a way out, or the world would swallow them whole. To be continued. The eviction hit faster than anyone could have imagined. One minute, Naomi was shoving school clothes into trash bags. The next, a police officer was in the hallway, giving her just 10 minutes to leave. Her son, Malik, struggled to carry their few remaining blankets. Aisha clutched her only doll, and little Jamir cried until his voice was raw. They stepped out into the cold Baltimore morning with nothing but what they could hold. Sweat and tears mingled on Naomi's face, her braids sticking to her skin as she fought to keep her composure. Every step felt like a walk of shame, and every stranger's glance was a fresh cut. They found a temporary spot in a run-down church basement. The floors were cold concrete, the lights flickered, and the smell of mildew seemed to cling to everything. The children huddled together, their faces a mixture of fear and a desperate hope that their mother still had a plan. But Naomi was hanging on by a thread. At night, while everyone else slept, she would stare at the ceiling, replaying her husband's disappearance over and over in her mind, searching for answers, but only finding more pain. During the day, she pounded the pavement, looking for work. But every interview was a carbon copy of the last. A forced smile, a quick look at her worn clothes, a glance at her children waiting outside, and then a polite rejection. Sometimes it was racism disguised as professionalism. Other times it was just the world being cruel. Each time, it was another door slammed shut. After her 8th rejection in a single week, Naomi finally broke down on a bus stop bench. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. She hated crying in front of her kids, but she had nothing left to hide. "Mom, we're still with you," Malik whispered, and his words almost shattered her. That night, back in the shelter, Naomi overheard 2 social workers discussing a technical training program. It was tough, selective, and demanding, but graduates were almost guaranteed a job. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a tiny spark ignited within her. It was a flicker of hope, but it was enough. It was enough to make her say the words she'd been avoiding for so long. We going to start over. And the very next morning, she took the first step toward a new life, a life she never thought she could have. The training program was brutal. Naomi knew that before she walked through the doors, but knowing didn't soften the reality. She was surrounded by younger students, wealthier students, people with free time, stable homes, and full stomachs. Naomi had none of that. She studied in the shelter, her children asleep beside her. She memorized formulas under streetlights when the building lost power. She arrived at class exhausted, still wearing the same worn jacket, her dark skin glowing faintly from the cold air outside. Her hands trembled from fatigue as she gripped a pencil, but her eyes never lost their intensity. Some teachers underestimated her. Some classmates stared at her with pity, others with suspicion. A few whispered behind her back, wondering how someone like her ended up in their program. But Naomi didn't care. Every hardship felt like fuel. Every prejudice sharpened her focus. Every failure from her past whispered the same message. Rise. Rise again. The days blurred together in a relentless cycle. Mornings meant getting the kids ready, rushing them to school, then sprinting to catch the bus to her classes. Afternoons were lectures she could barely afford to miss. Evenings were homework, dinner made from whatever she could stretch, and bedtime stories told through exhausted smiles. Nights were for studying, sometimes until 2 in the morning, sometimes until dawn broke through the shelter windows. Her children became her strength. Malik helped Aisha with homework so Naomi could study. Aisha braided her mother's hair every morning so she looked strong. Jameer climbed onto her lap each night and whispered, "You can do it, Mommy." Their small sacrifices, playing quietly, eating less so she could have more, waiting patiently when she was buried in textbooks, cut deeper than any struggle she faced alone. Their belief in her became the fire that pushed her through each sleepless night. There were moments she wanted to quit, days when the math didn't make sense, when instructors moved too fast, when her body screamed for rest, days when other students complained about minor inconveniences while she wondered if they'd have food for dinner. But then she'd look at her children's faces, at the dreams reflected in their eyes, and she'd find a way to keep going. Slowly, very slowly, things began to change. Naomi passed her first major exam, then the second, then the third. Her instructors started noticing her determination. Her classmates began asking her for help. The woman they once pitied became the one they respected, the one they called when they struggled, the one whose name appeared at the top of ranking lists. And for the first time since her husband disappeared, Naomi felt something she had forgotten: pride. Months later, Naomi stood on a stage, holding a certificate with shaking hands. Her children cheered from the front row, their dark-skinned faces glowing with joy. Tears streamed down Malik's cheeks. Aisha jumped up and down. Amir soted, "That's my mommy," so loud the entire auditorium heard. She had done it, against every statistic, against every barrier, against every shadow that tried to swallow her whole. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Thank you for watching this chapter of Naomi's journey. If a story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe. And don't miss the next episode, because her fight is only getting stronger.